Hey, Doug Murin here. I know it looks like I'm sitting in a jail cell, but I'm actually in my temporary office until we move to the beach in Tampa here in a little bit. Um, what we're going to talk about here is something I promised from last week about increasing your visitor rate in your church. Now, when we talk about conventional church, it does take some planning, some work, some training to get a church to think about having people visit. From my experience, when churches experience early growth rather quickly, this isn't quite that big an issue because there's early dynamism in a group. Uh, I find that can come in seasons to a church, but basically it lasts, say, the first 3 to 5 years, and then some. You have to get deliberate about what you used to be accidental about. Now, if you're in some of the other models I just wrote about in my book Leadership, which is soon to be in your hands, I hope, uh, if you have an affinity group for a church, which is a church, probably it's going to be a lot more natural to invite people, and maybe the power of those kinds of gatherings. I would just encourage you to make sure that you still make those a an opportunity to receive Christ, because that's what we're about. Um, the other thing is if you have a preaching point, which means say 2 to 10 people are actually doing ministry outreach of creative capacities. If you'd like to know more about that, simply email me at murin.consultation@gmail, and I will mail you about a 6-page outline of how to do a preaching point and know what one is. We're going to be attempting to get those set up in 3 cities here soon, but it is a pretty significant R&D project. So we'll see how that goes. Or maybe your thing is a what I call modified conventional church, which maybe means you meet once a month, or you meet some other day of the week, but you essentially sing and do the different things. That too can require a deliberate plan. So I want to just encourage you to realize that we're not talking about, you know, unneeded or irrelevant planning and strategic work. In the scriptures, the reason I'm comfortable talking about growth, I don't think numbers at any cost is the deal. But as you go back even into the Old Testament, the covenant of Abraham, which is the foundational covenant even of the New Testament, the promise was that Abram would multiply, he would increase. The same promise came to Jacob. And we see evidence that that was the same promise to the ministry of Jesus. And the promise to Solomon and David. Increase is a natural part of adulthood. That's why I believe all churches should start other churches. It's part of being an adult. You multiply and fill the earth with the relationship and love of Christ. That's what we're to do, is to gather in more friendships and more relational reconnections by covenant to God because of the cross. Now, quickly here, I'm not going to use up much more of your time on this one because we're going to keep coming back at it. I want to talk to you about the cycle of let's call it the cycle of conversion. I think we get stymied and stagnant when it comes to new people coming to our place because we stop the process of the conversion cycle, or let's call it even a visitor to assimilated and to fruitful person in your church. In most of this last, say, 2 centuries approach to church, if a person meets Christ, or what we call get saved, we celebrate because, by gum, they've made it. Well, the truth is, you need a plan that touches on 12 stages in the process of conversion. If you looked at your church now, probably a lot of the decreasing in visitor rates is you have a bottleneck and therefore a lack of energy and enthusiasm in your church Because 20 years ago, many salvation-oriented churches would every week preach a salvation message, and so once you got saved, you had to sit there and hear about getting saved again and again. Actually, when a person comes as a visitor to your church, they're already into what I call the third stage of conversion. And you want to move them to the 12th one, which will bring fruitfulness into your church. Trust me. An unreleased church will become a stagnant church. The first phase is what I call the stage of ignorance. They don't know anything about you. Then they're made aware of people in your church, or somehow they're aware of the gospel, and they have an awareness. Now, that doesn't mean they fully understand it, but they've got a feel for it. And then that should lead to, or does, to curiosity. That's what evangelists should do, is in the early stages create a lot of curiosity. If you train your church to make people curious, you will see people come. Without curiosity, people move in no direction. I mean, if they see a car on the lot and want to buy it, they first have to be curious before they go and look at it. The next phase, I call attending or moving in there. The third is participation. Participation leads to belonging. And you need to think about that. When you have your visitor assimilation rate, do you speak to all those stages? So often we only speak to the first time visitor and we think, let's assimilate them. Assimilation is far more complicated and lengthy than that. You want to talk to the people who've been there maybe 10 times and they haven't participated yet, or they haven't sensed that they are part of the church yet. Language is the best way to deal with this. For example, inclusive language, where there's no us, them, but we're all one, works best. Instead of saying those people who don't know Christ, or you here today who are just visiting, don't do that. Make them all one. We, always use we, our, we, everything. Speak as though they're already there. Then you're able to assimilate them because you've treated them like they are there, rather than keeping them outside for a long time. Now I'm going to stop right there and let you think about that, and next time, probably next week, we'll come back with visitor rate discussion, and we'll finish the 12-stage process to assimilating and seeing people converted in your church.